What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's transfer tips for Game Week 21. So I'm going to go through some of the popular players being moved in and out of people's teams, discuss whether they are good moves and possible alternatives as well. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Let's get into it. So let's start with Trent Alexander-Arnold. No defender has had more transfers out than him so far this week. He has had quite a few transfers in as well, but some people with him in their squad have started to lose patience after that Man United game where he got a 0-pointer and obviously didn't play that well. Now, personally, I think there's been a bit of an overreaction for what this means for FPL moving forward. If you've got Trent in your squad, that feels like an unbelievably easy hold to me. The next two fixtures are Forest away, Brentford away. Not amazing, but not terrible. We knew he had them when we brought him in. And even if they don't get a clean sheet, we know he's got attack and returns in his locker. 1 goal, 4 assists so far. Ipswich at home in 23 is a good fixture on paper. And then in 24 or 25, you've got a very likely double game week. I can't see any sense in using a transfer to get rid of him. The idea that Connor Bradley is now going to get lots of starts because of that Man United game feels a little bit far-fetched to me. Bradley's only started once so far this season in the Premier League, and that was when Trent was injured. And I just think if Trent's not going to Real Madrid in January, which seems really unlikely, is Arne Slot, with the title on the line in his first season at Liverpool, going to bench arguably the best right-back in the world for multiple games? It seems very unlikely to me. Now, some people are arguing that, yeah, fair enough, right? That might not happen. Trent might just get benched early, but in the double, he might not start twice because Bradley's back. That's a fair enough argument, but we knew Connor Bradley was going to be back around this time. So we knew he'd be back by the double game week. So again, it feels like a bit of an excuse to get rid of him when we already basically had this information. So has that Man United game changed everything? Personally, I don't think so. Now, I will say this. Liverpool have their first leg of the semi-final of the Carabao Cup tonight away to Spurs, followed by an FA Cup game against Accrington Stanley, who are they, by the way, on Saturday. Then it's Forest on Tuesday. If Connor Bradley starts against Spurs and Trent starts against Accrington Stanley, then maybe I will panic a little bit. But if Trent is in this team against Spurs, then for me, nothing has changed. We've still got an unbelievably attacking defender in our team with decent fixtures and a double game week coming up. I just can't see why you would get rid of him. It just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. And people will say that he's not playing well because Real Madrid are calling and his head's not quite there. But this has been going on for a while. I know the bid only came in about a week ago, right? That 20 million bid, whatever it was. But the noise around Trent and Real Madrid has been going on for a while. Nobody was talking about his head being turned when he was smashing in a 15-pointer against West Ham. And that's why I think there's been a bit of an overreaction. You can argue that Konate being back cheaper gives you clean sheets for less money. Fair enough. But you're talking about using a transfer to get rid of him when he's already in your squad. If you don't own him, then maybe it's a little bit different. You can give yourself a little bit more thinking time before you need to bring him in. That game against Ipswich in Game Week 23 is quite a nice entry point for Liverpool players. And also, you have 5 games before that. Carabao Cup, FA Cup, Forest, Brentford, a Champions League game, then the Ipswich game. So if you really want to give yourself some time to see what happens with Bradley and Trent and the minutes moving forward, and you don't own him, then fair enough. Maybe you wait until Ipswich at home. But for everyone that's got him, I don't know, for me, it just feels very easy to keep hold of him. If he doesn't start tonight against Spurs, maybe I'll panic a little bit, but that seems unlikely. And just to clarify, I'm saying that it's unlikely that I'll panic, not that it's unlikely that he'll be benched, because that could happen, right? Arne Slot might want to just take him out of the firing line based on that Man United game, although I would argue if you bench him for Spurs and then play him against Accrington Stanley, that raises more questions than not. But let's see what happens. If he is benched, I'll discuss it a bit closer to the deadline. So let's move on to another defender, Kerkez at Bournemouth, who's had nearly 80,000 transfers in so far this week. Absolutely smashed it over the last 4 game weeks. 3 clean sheets and 1 assist. That's great value at 4.7 million. That being said, I probably wouldn't bring him in this week, and that's purely a fixtures play. You got Chelsea away, Newcastle away, Forest at home, Liverpool at home, next 4. Doesn't really scream clean sheets. Yes, he has a bit of an attacking threat, but not enough to warrant getting him with the next 4 matches that Bournemouth have. So I personally would look elsewhere if you need a defender under 5 million. The top 2 options are probably Munoz and Lewis Hall, not necessarily in that order. I still really like Munoz. I've got him in my squad. He has genuine attacking threat, and his expected goals, expected assists are skewed more towards goal threat. So that's really nice. But 3 of the next 4 fixtures are away. Leicester, West Ham, Man United. And by the time you get to that West Ham game, they may well have Graham Potter in charge instead of Lopetegui. And then the match in between is Brentford at home. So I don't necessarily see a huge amount of clean sheets for Palace, although the fixtures on paper are not bad. But he does have good goal threat. On the other hand, Lewis Hall, a little bit more expensive, has Wolves at home, Bournemouth at home, Fulham at home in 3 of the next 4. And the away game is Southampton. So clean sheet wise, it's definitely Newcastle. Only slight doubts in my mind are that Botman is back now. So if Schär and Botman's going to be the centre-back partnership, Dan Burn has to go somewhere. And in the past, we have seen Eddie Howe use him at left-back a lot. Eddie Howe is a big fan of Dan Burn. Now, personally, I think Lewis Hall will continue in that side because he's played so well. I just think they're more balanced with him rather than Dan Burn, because Dan Burn does not have that attacking threat down that left flank. But there is a small chance. I'd maybe put it at like 2%. So probably not enough to put you off buying Lewis Hall. Only other thing to mention is that Newcastle beat Arsenal in the first leg of the Carabao Cup semi-final last night, 2-0. So they take that 2-0 lead into a home game in the second leg. The odds will say now that Newcastle are very likely to go through to the final, and that is how I would treat it until we know different. We will find out the results of that second leg after game week 24, but before game week 25. So we've got a few weeks to go yet. That means if Newcastle get to the final, the Newcastle and Palace in game week 29 will be a blank. It will be off. So any Palace and Newcastle players you've got won't play that week. Some people might just want to load up on them anyway because of the fixtures, then free hit in 29. Not necessarily a terrible strategy, but there will be another blank in 34, which that free hit might be more useful for. So I'm not saying you can't bring in Palace and Newcastle players. I would just see how it affects your team later on by how many you bring in now. So Lewis Hall, Gordon, etc. still really good options. Same for like Eze, Sarr, Munoz. But later on, how many transfers back out is that going to cause you? So that's all I would think about with those 2 players. But in the short term, they are probably the best options. In terms of other players you could look at, Man United defenders, because they've got Southampton at home this week, possibly. But I just don't think any of them are fully nailed enough to warrant bringing in. Like Mazraoui is a really good price, and he's playing wing-back at the moment. But if Ahmad moves back to right wing-back, does Mazraoui play every game at right centre-back? He'll play the majority, but I don't think you can guarantee that he plays every game. Martinez, left centre-back, is pretty nailed, but doesn't offer a huge amount of attacking threat, despite the fact he just scored against Liverpool. And after that Southampton game, you then got Brighton at home, Fulham away, Palace at home, Spurs away. It's an okay fixture run, but not great. And I wouldn't, even as someone that likes buying Man United players where possible, I've had Bruno a lot, I wouldn't say that Man United have turned a corner based on that Liverpool game. We've been here many times before, so I would personally ignore them. If you want someone really cheap, then Castagna is still just 4.2 million, but the fixture run is not amazing for clean sheets. West Ham away, Leicester away, Man United at home, Newcastle away, next 4, but value-wise, pretty decent. Forest defenders have been great, and the fixture run is not that bad coming up, but it is Liverpool at home this week. Doesn't really make much sense to me to buy one against one of the best attacks in the league. After that, Southampton at home, Bournemouth away, Brighton at home, Fulham away is okay, but it's not amazing. I think, oh God, I'm going to regret saying this. I think Forest players in general are maybe a little bit overrated right now. I think the defence is very good. Chris Wood has got a lot of returns, but I'm not sure they're quite as good as everyone is making out. I'm not sure if this will continue. Like how Wolves didn't score against Forest, I'm not quite sure. I mean, Sells in goal did really well, but Strand Larsen should have put at least one of those chances away. And on another day, if that happens, people maybe look at the Forest defence a little bit differently. Like they're not going to keep a clean sheet against Liverpool. It's quite unlikely anyway. Bournemouth away is tough. Fulham away is a pretty good attack as well. I think they're good. I do think they're good. And maybe you could argue under 5 million defensively, they are the best team. I can't see me bringing in a Forest defender before Lewis Hall, for example. And then I've added Mikalenko just because of that double in 24 or 25. But in terms of points before that stage, like Villa at home, Spurs at home, Brighton away, you're not going to need him right now. The only reason you'd look at Mikalenko is if you're downgrading a defender for money elsewhere and you don't need that defender right now, you could just leave Mikalenko on your bench until the double. But who knows? Maybe Everton will go and buy a left-back in the transfer window. So there is some doubts there. Even with the blank in 29, I think Munoz and Lewis Hall are probably the better options, but just keep in mind how that might affect your team later on. Let's talk about Luis Díaz next. Just over 150,000 transfers out so far this week, and I feel like his ownership has just been up and down all season. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is because he's a minutes risk, and people keep talking themselves into the fact that he's not, or they know he is, and they think that he's going to get enough returns and that it won't matter if he's benched or gets subbed early. But as soon as that happens and he doesn't have the returns to go along with it, that gets really frustrating. And so then people sell him. So I think at this stage, let's just accept that you cannot rely on Luis Díaz for starts. And even if he does start, he could get subbed early. And the reason for that, why we have to accept it, it's been happening all season, right? Even if you look back to right at the start, when I looked like a proper idiot for ignoring him, and he was getting loads of returns in the first 5 game weeks, he was still getting subbed early. Then he got subbed early against Wolves with a blank. Then he was benched. Then people panic sold him. Then he gets back in the team. Then he's benched again. It's been happening all year long. Even when Jota was injured, he's still getting benched. Game week 12, he was benched against Southampton, 90 minutes against City, benched against Newcastle, 90 minutes against Fulham, got the 2 goals recently against Spurs, then he's benched against Leicester, starts against West Ham, starts against Man United, but he's subbed before 60. All season long, this has been happening. So unless you are prepared to accept that, do not buy him, because it will get frustrating when he stops starting or when the returns dry up a little bit. And I think right now there's just a lot of good midfielders. Like in my team, I've got Salah, Eze, Palmer, and Burmo Rodgers. I'd happily add Anthony Gordon. I'd happily add Bruno Fernandes way before I would be going for Luis Díaz, even knowing there's a probable double for Liverpool coming up pretty soon. But unless he's going to play both of those games, there's not really huge upside there. So personally, if you haven't got Díaz, I'm waiting for as long as possible to bring him in just to see if there's any other injuries. Like if Jota picks up another injury and Nunez isn't playing great, then yes, we probably will see Gakpo and Díaz most of the time, but it's still not a guarantee. And with Jota building up fitness, it just becomes more of a problem. So I would not buy him right now. In terms of selling him, this is why I hate owning players like this. Because with Ipswich at home in 23 and then that double to come, it feels like you've got to hold him. Like how can you use a transfer to get rid of a player that will probably start more games than he doesn't? But at the same time, there's so many midfielders doing well right now. I feel like you just cut your losses and go for someone a little bit safer. Like right now, I know it's boring, I've said this before, but I'm probably looking at double Liverpool defence ahead of double attack just because I can rely on the minutes and there's so many other good attackers doing well right now. So personally, I think if you're looking at Díaz or Jota or Gakpo, you put it off as long as possible. And by the way, I know that Gakpo has started a lot of games in a row at the moment. I think he's started every single game since game week 12 and he continues to do so. I still think he's a risk. I honestly do. There's plenty of times where he's been subbed early. I'm fairly sure they were going to sub him off early in that Man United game before he scored. And with Jota again building up fitness, at some point he's going to start number 9. And it doesn't guarantee that Gakpo is going to start on the left. It could be Luis Díaz instead. So I just think it's a massive headache all around. If you've got Díaz, fair enough. If you want to sell him, do not buy him. You can't cope with the benchings, trust me. So speaking of midfielders that are great when they start but massively frustrating when they're benched, let me present to you Savinho at Man City. Nearly 200,000 transfers in this week after 5 attacking returns in the last 2 game weeks, 4 assists and 1 goal. And actually, when he started, he's done really well this season. 8 attacking returns in 12 starts is a decent return. The problem is he's only started 12 times, and it's not just because of injury. It's because he's a Man City player, and often players are taken out of the team and someone else is played instead. Now, right now, I think Savinho mostly has that left wing spot nailed down. Pep Guardiola has spoken about the fact that Jack Grealish has to fight with Savinho to win his place back, but who knows when that might happen, and that is the problem with players like this. Also, I would argue the fixture run is not good enough to take a punt on a Man City player like this. Not for long term anyway. Brentford away, Ipswich away, next 2 games are not bad. And for those 2 matches, he might do really well. But after that, it's Chelsea at home, Arsenal away, Newcastle at home, Liverpool at home. So 3 of those 4 are at home. But they're against Chelsea, Newcastle, Liverpool. And the one in between is Arsenal away. It's just not good enough, in my opinion, to warrant taking this risk. Like, his underlying numbers are great. 0.23 expected goals per 90, 0.41 expected assists. But how often does he play 90 minutes and how long can you guarantee the starts for? And often with picks in FPL, it's not just about how good value someone might be, it's also about what you're giving up. I've already spoken a few times in this video about how many good midfielders there are right now. If you've got Savinho in one of those spots, it means you don't have one of those other excellent midfielders. So if he continues to start, he will be great value. There are question marks there. The fixtures get worse quite soon. I just can't really see a great reason to bring him in. Let's take a look at Chris Wood next. Another goal in game week 20 takes him to 4 goals in the last 10 game weeks, but more importantly, 12 goals for the season, which is a great return when he only cost 6.8 million. And that has caused 100,000 people to bring him in already this week. Now, if you've got him in your squad, for most people, it's probably quite an easy hold because you want that Southampton game in game week 22. And for Liverpool at home in 21, you either bench him if you've got 7 other great attackers, or you just play him. It's not a huge problem. Should you be looking to bring him in this week, though? Probably not in most cases. Like, I know Liverpool can be gotten at. They've only got 1 clean sheet in their last 6 game weeks, but it's still not a great fixture on paper. It doesn't feel like a nice entry point for Nottingham Forest players. If you need the money for another move, like you're doing Jackson to Wood because you want to get money for a midfielder or a defender, whatever it might be, and you want him long term, maybe that makes a bit of sense. But if it's a one transfer move, there's plenty of other forwards that have also got good fixtures this week that you can just hold, and you can look to get Chris Wood in game week 22 instead. And I do really like that Southampton fixture. I do question a little bit, though, how good the fixture run is afterwards. Bournemouth away, Brighton at home, Fulham away, Newcastle away. It's not great on paper having 3 away games in the 4 after Southampton. And I keep looking at his underlying numbers, thinking this cannot continue. Like 0.31 expected goals per 90 is not amazing. But also, he is on penalties, he is nailed, and maybe he's just having one of those seasons. And to provide a little bit of balance here, Mbeumo is also massively overperforming. He's doubled his XG. That will not continue, but I'm not looking to take him out of my side anytime soon. So maybe I should be a little bit less harsh on Chris Wood's prospects over the next few weeks. All I would say, I just wouldn't be surprised if the returns eventually slowed down. And actually, they kind of already have. 4 goals in the last 10 game weeks versus like 8 in the game weeks before that. There has been a slowdown already, but I think the fact that he's nailed, the minutes are good, he's got penalties, Forest obviously playing really well at the moment and doing extremely well in the league, there's every reason to look at him. I just don't think if you're not an owner, I don't think there's a panic to get him for Liverpool at home. Just not a great fixture. Wait until game week 22. And if you get to game week 22 and you've got another transfer to make, so be it, right? Other players will also score points. So if you've got him, easy hold. If you don't have him, personally, I'd rather wait until 22 if you can. So Gabriel Jesus has had just over 70,000 transfers out this week. And for me, this is a fairly simple one. If you don't own him, I'd probably ignore him. For the same reason that I just wouldn't look at Liverpool attackers not called Mo Salah. And that's because I think there's just too much risk with his minutes. Even though he started the last 4 games, I look at the Carabao Cup match last night against Newcastle. That was a pretty strong lineup that Arteta went with. And Jesus wasn't in the 11. It was Trossard on the right, Martinelli on the left, and Havertz through the middle. Now, I didn't watch that game. I only saw what people were kind of talking about in terms of performances. And it looks like Trossard didn't play that well, especially in the first half. So maybe Jesus just comes back in and permanently plays now, especially with Nwaneri out for a few weeks. But it's not a guarantee. I think there's lots of other good forwards out there. I probably just wouldn't go for Jesus. If you're already an owner, it's a little bit trickier, but I'd probably lean towards keeping him. There are some good forwards this week, like João Pedro's got Ipswich away, Raul Jimenez on penalties, West Ham away, etc., who are a little bit cheaper. Chris Wood is a long-term nailed pick you could go for. But Spurs at home is a pretty good fixture. And if I was an owner, I'd be looking at 4 starts in a row in the league for Jesus as quite promising moving forward. And yes, he blanked against Brighton. It's frustrating. But he played 90 minutes after playing 90 minutes against Brentford as well. Like, I can't guarantee that will keep happening. Absolutely not. And it would be enough what happened in the Carabao Cup last night to put me off getting him, but I would be tempted to keep him against a Spurs defence that gives up a lot of chances. Spurs' defensive performances so far this year in terms of expected goals, absolutely terrible, and you can just take it week by week. And if you really want Chris Wood, for example, which I know a lot of people do, just keep Jesus for Spurs instead of getting Wood for Liverpool, and then make the switch in game week 22. Yes, you might lose a little bit of team value along the way, but if Jesus smashes it against Spurs, you might just want to hold on to him and just see how things go, because the fixture run is pretty good for Arsenal. So it probably depends on what type of manager you are. If you're going to get frustrated the next time he's benched in the league, just get rid of him, save yourself a headache. You'll probably make better decisions without those kind of problems in your team. But I think for a lot of people, I would just keep him. It's a good fixture coming up next. So it's Enzo Fernandez next. Just over 100,000 FPL managers have already sold in this week, and that's probably due to the fact that he's blanked for 4 game weeks in a row. So people are just frustrated with him. If I could make an overall point about midfielders in and around the 5 to 5.5 million price bracket, we probably need to stop chasing points as much. I'm not saying everybody has done that, But over the last 8 to 10 weeks, it's happened quite a lot. People are spending a lot of transfers on the likes of Rodgers, Enzo, Ahmad, even Iwobi, right? And now the new kid on the block is Jacob Murphy. They're all decent picks for their price, especially as enablers. But to me, that's all they are. The reason they're priced like this is because either we don't have a consistency of attack and returns, the underlying numbers are good but not amazing, or they're not completely nailed on. Every now and again, at this price, you get an absolute gem of a pick, like Mahrez at Leicester the season they won the league. Obviously, Cole Palmer last season was absolutely ridiculous. None of these players are like those. They are good, but they're not amazing. And therefore, I question how many transfers we should be spending moving them around. Like, they should just be on your bench some weeks, playing in other weeks, and that's about it. And actually, if I look at Enzo's returns, like, everyone got really excited about him when he got 6 attack and returns in a row. I looked at his expected goal involvement over those games, and it averaged 0.49, which is actually pretty decent for a player that costs 5.1. The last 4 games where he's blanked, and it has been frustrating because he's had games like Fulham at home, Ipswich away, he's averaged 0.41 expected goal involvement. So a small drop-off, but we are talking about very small sample sizes. 0.41 expected goal involvement for a player that costs 5.1 million, that's playing 90 minutes every week, is still decent. So the returns will probably come, but you shouldn't be expecting a goal or an assist every single week. That was never, ever going to continue. And Chelsea's fixtures are still pretty good. His underlying numbers are still decent. So is it really worth using a transfer to sell him to Ahmad or to sell him to Jacob Murphy or Iwobi or whichever 5 million-ish midfielder is, you know, pick of the week this week? Probably not. So if you're getting money from somewhere else and you're doing like Enzo to Gordon or Fernandes or whoever it might be, absolutely fair enough. I spoke earlier about the fact that it's not just about value sometimes, it's about the spot they take. So I'd much rather have Bruno or Gordon than Enzo. But if you're just switching him to another cheap midfielder, I just don't think it's worth it. I think whoever you've got, Ahmad, Enzo, Rodgers, etc., you can probably just hold on to them. All that being said, I probably should give some airtime to Jacob Murphy because he's had nearly 100,000 transfers in this week off the back of 8 attack and returns in 6 game weeks, which is quite incredible considering he only cost 5.1 million. So you can see why people are bringing him in. And the next 4 fixtures are decent. Wolves at home, Bournemouth at home, Southampton away and Fulham at home. It does get more difficult 25 onwards. They got City away, which is not so great. Liverpool away in 27, a possible blank in 29. But in the short term, he looks good. So should you be looking to bring him in? Possibly. Do you need to downgrade another midfielder to have funds for another move? If so, maybe you go for Jacob Murphy. But that's about the only circumstance that I would probably be looking at it. If you've got Ahmad or Enzo or Rodgers, whichever cheap enabler it is right now, I'd question whether or not it's worth the move. Yes, things look great for Jacob Murphy right now. He's getting a ridiculous amount of returns. It doesn't mean that will continue. People are talking about Newcastle players as if they're absolutely essential. And it is pretty nice right now to have 2 or 3. And that can include Jacob Murphy. But they are not essential. Like, you look at the underlying numbers, yes, it's decent. 0.17 expected goals per 90, 0.27 expected assists. It's quite similar to what Enzo Fernandes has done over the last kind of 6 to 10 weeks. But Jacob Murphy doesn't always play 90 minutes. He's doubled the amount of assists versus expected assists so far. These returns will not continue forever. And long term, I don't necessarily know if he's a brilliant pick. Like, is he guaranteed to keep the minutes? If he keeps playing like he is right now, and Newcastle keep winning, absolutely. But he is susceptible to early substitutions. And if something gets changed in that attack, it'll almost certainly be Murphy out before Gordon. To me, Murphy to Gordon is what Ahmad is to Bruno. They're both extremely good value, but you pay the extra for consistency and security in minutes. So it's not to put anyone off buying Jacob Murphy. He's clearly extremely good value right now. But as we've seen with other players like Rodgers and Enzo and Ahmad, things change so quickly. People get frustrated with these kind of players as soon as they start blanking. And it's just not worth it for a £5 million midfielder. So if you need a different cheap enabler, fair enough. But I think for a lot of you, you can probably just keep whoever you've got. And I'm sure Jacob Murphy's going to continue to make me look like an idiot over the next 4 weeks. But it often happens. There's always a different player making me look like an idiot. I'm well used to it. If you enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button, and rate 5 stars if you're listening on podcast. Leave me a comment to let me know how much you disagree with all my thoughts and opinions on this video as well. and I will catch you for another one soon. I'm not sure when the next video will be. Game week preview, I expect. Maybe tomorrow, maybe not until Sunday. I'll have a think about that. And obviously, the rest of the videos will be closer to the deadline on Tuesday. Anyway, I'm off. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.